Listen, there's literally 1,001 ways to make a candle. The process has a lot of dials and knobs you can turn to try to get the best outcome possible. And today, I'm going to talk about all of those variations. I'll talk about my recent soy wax experiment, and I'll give you 5 strategies to consider for your next candle. Hello, my name is Kevin from Armatage Candle Company, the premier online resource for accelerating your candle making technique and business. And today we're going to talk about variations in your process. Remember, candle making has a lot of different elements. You've got your process, you've got your environment, you've got your supplies. Those are a big part of it. But today we're going to talk about the little adjustments you can make when you create your candle. What am I talking about? Things you can do in your process to make your candle turn out better, or at least try something that might turn it out better. I'm talking about things like preheating your jar, cooling it at a faster rate, pouring it at a higher temperature. Maybe you try the tinfoil wrap hack that's been going around, or maybe it's just pouring a little hotter than you used to, or adjusting that pour temperature. So let's lay out these factors and do a little math problem. If you want to preheat your candle, you either preheat it or you don't, so there's 2 options. If you want to adjust your room temperature, you can have it hot, medium, or cold. Medium, normal. That's 3 options. If you want to adjust your pour temperature, now there's a lot of variations here. Let's simplify it and say that there's 5 different pour temperatures, and there's actually more, right? You could literally pour at any temperature, but we'll keep it simple. 5 pour temperatures. Whether or not you cover it, so put a lid on it right after you pour, that's 2. Whether or not you wrap it in tin foil, that's 2 more options. How fast you cool the candle after you pour, so make it take forever to cool down, that could be 1 option. Just normal, whatever the ambient room temperature, that's the 2nd option. And then cool it super fast, like hyper fast, like put it in the freezer or the fridge, or if you're in Minnesota, just put it outside. So that'd be the 3rd option. There's 3 with the cooling rate. And then humidity. The humidity in your room. Is it a high humidity? Is it just normal, about 50%? Or is it really low? Like here in Minnesota, I can't even get it to be above 45%. It's insane. So that's 3 options. So if we take that entire thing, if we want to find out the total amount of combinations of these things, we just multiply these numbers together. So what do we get? 2 times 3 times 5 times 2 times 2 times 3 times 3 is 1,080. Literally 1,080 different ways that you can combine all of these factors. Maybe you do preheat, you turn your room dial up, you keep the humidity low, you wrap it in tin foil, and you cool it at a normal rate. That's one of 1,080 different options. So 1,080 options, and that's not even including supplies. Like, we haven't even talked about how much fragrance oil to put in, what wax you're using, what the blend percentage is. You know, all of these things come into candle making. So that's why it's somewhat of a complicated process. You can almost say it's a complicated math problem because you're trying to put all of these factors together. Now, that's not to say that this is a needle in the haystack. It's not like only one of these options will work. But I wanted to take this on my own time. So I decided to do a little experiment, and I made a bunch of candles using Nature Wax C3 soy wax, trying out small adjustments in these dials. I started with a control candle. So the control candle being the supplier's recommendations. I made it exactly by the book. Heated it to 185, pour at 160 plus or minus 5 degrees Fahrenheit. I cooled it in a room that was 70 degrees with about 40% humidity, and that is my starting point. So every candle I made after that, I tried out one additional change from this huge list of things we can do to make candles turn out differently, or these adjustments in our process. And the results were actually really dissatisfying. The control candle came out with a smooth top. It looked actually pretty good. And then I proceeded to make 7 more candles. I preheated, I wrapped in tin foil, I cooled it outside in the Minnesota weather. I tried to slow down the cool rate as much as possible. I tried a lot of different ways to make a candle to adjust my process and to see what works and what doesn't. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, they all turned out with smooth tops. I don't even want to admit that because I know how much it is to struggle with soy wax to try to get a good result. Ideally, we're working towards a world where we don't have to heat gun the top, because think about this. If you're making a lot of candles and you're trying to produce and you're getting orders and you got to get things out the door or get them start curing at least, the last thing you want to do is spend a lot of time heat gunning every single one of your candles that doesn't go well. So you want it to have a smooth top. But more than that, you don't want it to have any craters under the surface. And craters are one of those things that you can have a smooth top, but you've got a pocket of air right underneath the surface. And this is something that presents itself as tunneling because it'll hit that crater, your wick will hit that crater and burn down real quick. But it's not tunneling, and it'll actually really screw up your candle if certain corrections aren't made. Anyways, all these candles came out with smooth tops, and it made me think, well, is it because I omitted fragrance oil? Because that's not what I understand about soy wax, but sure, I made a few more with fragrance oil, and same thing, they all came out with smooth tops. So the point of my experiment is to say it was a bad experiment. I should have used a more recent batch of wax, and I only used tins. Now, when you make candles, some people use tins, but a lot of people use jars, and there's so much variety in that my test was not conclusive, it's not comprehensive, and I don't want to say that every single way will work. Just wanted to share that with you because it was interesting to me. Okay, now the reason you're probably watching this video is I want to give you 5 strategies that you can take to use in your next candle. And these are lessons I learned from my experiment and from my history as a candle maker, what I believe you can do in your process strategies to enhance your product. Before I get into that, I just want to shout out that if you're a new candle maker and you like this content and you want something deeper, you want something better, I have an online course. It's self-paced. You own it. You can download everything. It's all yours. If you're interested in that, I have a link below that you can check out. But let's get into the strategies for improving your process. So the first strategy is this. When you make a candle for the first time, start with the supplier's recommendations. I call this the control candle. Heat up to what they say, pour at what they say, try to keep your environment at a reasonable temperature, 70 degrees Fahrenheit or so, and see how that turns out. Before you go crazy trying to adjust all these things in your process, it's good to maybe just start with the basics. Just start with what they think. A lot of suppliers do test a lot of their methods, and they sometimes hit the mark and sometimes they don't. There's so many things that are involved in candle making, it's impossible for them to give you the perfect recommendation. But the point of doing this their way is so you have a complete baseline for when you make adjustments and you dial up some knobs and you turn some switches and you flip some things over for what you're changing about it and how you're tailoring it to your experience. But that baseline is critical to understand exactly what you're doing differently than that, kind of a reference point. The second strategy for improving your process is to make the easy adjustments first. It's easy when things get bad to try to go crazy and start Googling and try to figure out what other people are doing, but start simple, right? Preheat your jars, see how that turns out. And if that doesn't go well, don't preheat your jars and try something else, like pouring your wax at a cooler temperature. With a lot of waxes, pouring cooler is a pretty good strategy. And if it's not too much trouble, try wrapping your candle in tinfoil and see how that works out for you. My third strategy for improving your process is if something works, prove it. So what I'm saying is if something you do turns out with good candles, do it again and validate it. Make sure that not only is the top smooth, but use a skewer or a knife or your finger if you need to, and make sure there's no craters or sinkholes right underneath the surface. A lot of people get excited, including myself. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a smooth top. Then you find out that it's got a bunch of craters underneath the surface, and you're like, oh, back to square one. So if something seems to work out, validate it, and then do it again to make sure that it does actually work. My fourth strategy for improving process is respect your wax. I didn't talk about supplies much, but it's really important to remember that every wax comes with its own nuances. Remember, soy wax is polymorphic, which means it's going to form crystals in response to time and changes in temperature. Paraffin often requires a second pour, so when you see that it's got this big divot in the middle, remember, it's not your fault. That's just what the wax does. It's normal, right? You can't make a process to completely overcome that because it's expected. And then you've got waxes like palm and beeswax, which have a high melt point, and they really want to become a solid again. So you have to make sure that when you're pouring or when you're making adjustments there, that you understand that that wax turns back into a solid a lot faster. With With palm wax, you literally have to flip your container over to make sure the air bubble gets to the top, because the top it cools so fast, it traps all the air before it has a chance to get out there. So you either melt that, which takes time, or you make an adjustment in your process to flip the candle over. And my fifth strategy for improving your process is learn from failure. Right? The only true failure is if you give up. And I want to encourage you not to do that, right? Take these non-successes and transform them into learning experiences. Transform this into a game that you have to play and figure out. And the biggest tool you have are your notes. And I've talked about that grossly in another video that you should go check out after you watch this one. But take these notes, understand what you're doing with your process. What is the outcome? What were your inputs and your outputs, right? The engine is what you have control over, and you can make adjustments there. You can't improve what you can't measure, and so it's important to measure these things. Take all the notes you can. There's a template over there. There's also a link below if you're interested in that, if you haven't gotten that already. But don't let failed candles beat you down, right? Is it Thomas Edison said that he found a lot of ways to not make a light bulb? Well, like him, I found a lot of ways to not make a candle. And while it looks easy, to my right, there's an entire graveyard of failed candles. Things that look horrible or don't smell or whatever else, right? Don't beat yourself up, right? Just learn from it. Use it. Use the experience to make the next candle a little bit better. So I want to encourage you with that. That's the fifth and final strategy, but that's a big one because so many people, they get discouraged, they get disheartened, but they're just throwing spaghetti at the wall, seeing what sticks, rather than taking a calculated, a lot more exposed effort at their candle making experience. And that's all I have. I hope that some of this was helpful, insightful, or useful to you. If it was, leave me a like. If you have any questions, leave me a comment below. I'll get to it when I can. Otherwise, I hope you have a great week. I hope you make beautiful candles, and I will see you in the next episode.